What's up, Cougar Nation, and welcome again aboard the Hype Train podcast. I'm your host, Joe Wheat. That's at Joey27 on Twitter. As always, joined by my buddies, Trevor Levitt and soon-to-be Hunter Miller. But before we start with that, DJ, play my theme music.
For 12 years, this game was absolutely stolen from us. We were excited about being in Big 12, but tonight I am not. We won this game. Someone else stole it from us. Very disappointed. I will talk to the commissioner. This was not fair to our team. I'm disgusted by the professionalism of the officiating crew tonight. Thank you.
Disgusted. Disgusted. He is disgusted. And wait. What is that? What is that? Do I hear calls for an encore? All right. Let's give the fans what they want.
Run it back.
Defense obviously showed up really well today. I mean,
yeah, I couldn't get that last stop, and we needed it, unfortunately. That's kind of been the story for several games. We play lights out and just can't get that one last stop. Thank you.
Threw a chair like it was
Not the
WWE, Trevor.
Not the chair.
Not the chair. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the 100th episode of the Hype Train
Let's
podcast.
go! Oh, I gotta get. Oh, it's not going. No.
It would appear that Utah's DBs are better at holding than Trevor is at
What is
trying to
happening?
do this popper.
I literally tested one earlier, and they're not
Oh,
working.
man. It's all right. We can fix this in
No!
post. We can fix it in post. It's fine. It's fine.
We gotta get one. There we go.
There we
There
go.
we go.
There we
Let's
go. 100 episodes of the Hype Train podcast. We appreciate you guys for joining us every single step of the way. And Trevor, when we were talking a few weeks ago about how we want to handle our 100th episode, whether or not we want to do an extra episode so that the 100th episode doesn't fall around the Holy War or anything like that. Do you remember what my response was?
We got it. I believe.
I ain't effing scared. That was the response. And guess what? I was absolutely terrified for about 59 minutes and 40 seconds. But boy, those last 20 seconds were elite.
We've had a couple of games like that.
Oh,
A couple that were just a little heartbreaking, and then at the end, we were good to go.
okay. So this was, I'm going to be honest, this was probably the first game of the season. Like BYU's had some close calls. There seems to be this narrative around the country that BYU is just like the Miami of the Big 12, which if BYU is the Miami of the Big 12, Utah is the Florida State of the Big 12, right?
Absolutely.
But there's this narrative that BYU is just getting lucky to win, being bailed up by the refs. I mean, the only three games that kind of, or I guess 4 games that fit that profile were SMU, where BYU outgained SMU by like 100 yards. Option number 2 is Baylor, where BYU had a 20-point lead in the first half and then just kind of coasted to the finish. Third was Oklahoma State, where that game was just whoever had the ball last, and BYU was not losing that game under any circumstance. And number 4 was this one. This one I get. Like this one I get a little bit of luck, a little bit of magic. But as Austin Collie says, when you're living right on and off the field, magic happens.
Magic happens. Dude, what a game. I mean, it was one of those days where there was not a single other thing that I could focus on. It was just right there, forefront of your mind, the Holy War, everything riding on it. And as you mentioned, like the first 60 minutes, or excuse me, almost, but the first like 58 and a half minutes were not really what you wanted to see. There were some good moments, like the offense had, its good moments. The defense kind of hung tight in there at the end, but it doesn't matter. Like it came down to kind of what we've been talking about all year, which is that teams, do these different things to BYU. They throw out quarterbacks that we've never seen. They have game plans that we've never had to work with during the season or that Jay Hill didn't anticipate, and it's still not enough. And the University of Utah threw at us their most highly attended football stadium ever at 54,000, and it still wasn't enough.
I loved Boney Fuller's tweet that congratulations to Utah for their largest crowd ever to watch a BYU win. That was just obviously it was excellent. Lots of social media reaction to get to, I am sure, because man, oh man, were there some serious meltdowns. But I guess my question for you is, what were your emotions going into halftime? What were your emotions coming out of halftime? And what were your emotions on that final drive?
I'm going to be honest. They were kind of like, they were all the same. Like, I don't want to be like the LeBron meme where like everyone jokes about him, saying like, oh, I knew this was going to happen or whatever. But there have been a couple of times this season where I sit down and a game starts, and regardless of how it looks at the beginning, you just kind of have this gut feeling that everything's going to be fine. The other two were Oklahoma State and Kansas State. And I had that same feeling going into the Utah game. And it just kind of felt like at half, I'm like, man, we're really not playing well. But Jay Hill's halftime adjustments have been solid all year. The offense was going to get things clicking. They were going to get things figured out. The defense was going to set them up to do what they needed to do and get down the field and score. And I just had this feeling all the way through. And then as Jake's getting sacked on that 4th and 10, it was kind of funny because I like verbally was like, like this was not how I expected this to go or how I felt like it was going to go. And then suddenly the little flag icon pulls up and they call defensive holding. And I'm like, there it is. And from then on, I knew I kind of started to get more confidence when that ball that Jake Retzlaff fumbled bounced right back up into his hands again. And I was just like, oh, here we go. It's like Parker Kingston all over again. Like, or they snap the ball back flat. He gets the ball knocked out again. We still managed to get it back. It was just one of those things where it's like balls literally bouncing BYU's way. And we've seen all year when that happens, they don't lose.
This is a team of destiny, man. Like I felt really hesitant to call them a team of destiny and like call this a special season. I mean, it was a special season no matter what, but I really hesitated to call this like an all-time great season until BYU cleared this hurdle with Utah. Like BYU has never had a special season where they didn't beat Utah, right? BYU finally, like they cleared that hurdle, and they did so in such spectacular fashion that it's just like, dare I say, this is 1984 all over again. Like it's just been that kind of year. Like BYU has definitely had a lot of bounces go their way. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like BYU hasn't had some fortunate bounces, but there's also been some unfortunate bounces that have not gone BYU's way this season. They're just forgotten because BYU just refuses to lose. In my post-game article with the takeaways, I called BYU the Michael Myers of college football, where they just destroy everything in their path, but most importantly, they just refuse to die. You think you got them on the ground. You think like, and as soon as their backs are turned, you see him rise up like the Undertaker in the WWE fight, and he lives for another 15 movies. Like it just kind of is what it is with this BYU team. Honestly, one of the mentally toughest BYU teams that I can remember. I don't know, man. Just I'm just glad they won. I watching that game. We had some friends over. It was a whole thing. This was the first time I've watched a BYU Utah game on TV with my parents in 10 years, like 12 years, honestly. And I was devastated, like going into the half and all of the things that were just going wrong for BYU. They just looked rattled. I had to go upstairs. I had to go upstairs and watch the game by myself in the dark, just because I couldn't take it. Like I could not take it. And so, at halftime, I texted my wife and was like, hey, I got to go for a walk. And she goes, that's great. Like whatever you got to do. And I go for a walk, and on the walk, I realized BYU is going to win this game. Like there's just like I've told this story before. At halftime of the 2018 game where BYU was up 20-0, looking up at that scoreboard and just thinking BYU is going to find a way to lose this game. This was the exact opposite. We're walking around my neighborhood. I thought about it and just thought, you know what? Jay Hill is going to make those halftime adjustments. BYU's offense is going to be able to put together enough drives in the clutch, even against a really stout Utah defense. They're just going to find a way to win it. And I don't know if it was my walking around the neighborhood, throwing it back to our roots, being all the way back, or if it was Will Ferrin just having nerves of steel. But BYU found a way, and they found a way in some of the one score games they've played this season. BYU's found a way, and other games they've dominated. But this is it's just one of those seasons, man. Team of destiny. That like, I don't know. I'm talking too much, but it's like in fishing. If any of you guys have ever fly fished, whenever I would get a fish on the line and lose it, like the fish got away, I would always be really upset because it was like, man, what if that was the dream fish? And then once I caught, and I went to Alaska with my dad, and I actually caught the fish of a lifetime. And now every time I lose a fish, it doesn't matter because I caught that one. This was that one fish. This was the final hurdle I needed to get over, where I don't think I could have mentally handled BYU's dream season being spoiled by Utah. I just couldn't have, I couldn't take it. And BYU got past that final hurdle, and now anything else that happens from here on out is gravy for me.
Well, it's just amazing. This game just felt like, and I can't imagine what it's going to even do to the confidence of the players, to be honest, because this is a game that I guarantee you mentioned this in your article, the team tried to go in with this. It's just another game, and it's not, and it never will be for any of these players. And so to be able to get over that hurdle, the validation of not only are you as good as you think you are, but you're the best team in the state, and there's no debating that at this point, is going to do wonders for them. But I think as a fan, you just kind of finally saw the perfect culmination of what this season has been so far. And it's kind of continued to show what this season could possibly be, because this is just a team that has matured and has worked hard and has let go of ego and a fear, even at times, that I saw in previous games in this rivalry, specifically in that 9-game losing streak. And they've matured into this confident but not cocky football team. Like, you look at the sideline, they pan over to Will Ferrin because, as the clock winds down and BYU has somehow managed to go 60 yards in 30 seconds with no timeouts after escaping the jaws of death on their 5-yard line. Here's Will Ferrin with just the biggest Jim Carrey grin on his face, just ready to kick this football. Kelly Popinga walks up to him and says, "Where do you want this ball?" He says, "Doesn't matter. It's going in." And that's just, it's a culmination of what this team does, man. They just win. They just win. It doesn't matter how little time is left, if they have timeouts left, if they haven't been able to move the ball super well, or they've just been absolutely horrid. I haven't even seen fans talk about this, but Aaron Roderick has been historically conservative inside of his own 20. And so the fact that they not only scored a 95-yard drive touchdown earlier in the game, but they went and did it again when it mattered most, to me just shows that this entire team has banded together. They've trusted in one another. It's the complete opposite of what we saw against Oklahoma State last year, where we had a lead and then the lack of trust made itself very apparent in the second half, and we paid for it. And this second half of this game was just complete complimentary football. The offense got back going again, and the defense said enough. Remember the Titans meme? They don't gain another yard. That is that's what went down. We had the special teams kick return in the first half. We had the game winner in the second half. It's just a complete football team, and complete football teams are so hard to beat because at any given point in time, they can make it a ball game. And in this case, it took 58 and a half minutes, but they made it a ball game and they came out on top against the most hostile environment and the best defense that they're going to play in the regular season.
Absolutely. To your point about, the complementary football it can't be overstated with this team. That's the reason they're so good. Like BYU is going to get doubted by the national media because they don't have a Cam Ward, right? Like they don't have a Shedeur Sanders. They don't have, just the marquee player, because everyone, like BYU it's like, if we think about it, BYU is kind of like the encapsulation of what the Big 12 is. Everyone is about as good as everyone else. They're exciting. They're thrilling to watch. And they just kind of find a way like that. That's kind of what the Big 12 has been all season. That's that's why they're so hard to beat, is because if something's not working, the other side is going to pick it up. Like if you're Miami, if Cam Ward doesn't have it going, their defense isn't good enough to pick up the slack. And that's ultimately why they lost against Georgia Tech. But like, I don't know, man, the Holy War, I just like it exists in its own context, right? It throw the stats out the window, throw the records out the window, throw the history out the window. All that matters is just winning the game. It's a bare knuckle boxing match where the only thing that decides the winner is who's left standing. Like it was one of those things where like normally I watch the box score just to see like, okay, what's our yards per play? What's, Jake Retzloff's numbers look like, just so I can, push the narratives at the end of the game about, we have all these great players and stuff like that. Utah, I didn't care. I did not care if Jake threw for 10. I don't care if Jake went 10 for 30, as long as those 10 passes led to a win. And that's how it's been in every game in this rivalry. Like in 2007, Max Hall went 17 for 40 with no touchdowns, one interception. In 2009, Max Hall went 12 for 32 with 134 yards and 2 touchdowns. But no one remembers that because they won. And that's really all that matters in this game. Hunter Miller, thank you for joining us.
Hunter Miller, everybody!
I would like to be the first to apologize for the rough loss for your alma mater.
Yeah, I mean, it was all right. It's we'll take one for the team. But yeah, I don't know how to. I mean, that I come on. It's episode 100. I got off a plane 20 minutes ago, and I rush here, and you're gonna start my introduction with the fact that I may have a diploma from.
I tried to help you out. I brought out the popper. All right.
I know.
You know what?
I brought it out.
No. This has been a multi-year sleeper cell with Hunter Miller, where he sowed the seeds of discord that resulted in this win for BYU. Hunter,
sleeper agent.
Exactly. Where did you watch the game? How did you consume it? What were your emotions going throughout? Give us your biggest takeaway from the game.
I watched the game from Newport Beach, California. Been a whirlwind of a week. If you saw last week's episode, I joined for about 30 seconds live from the Celtics game. I was in Boston for a few days, and then I went straight from there to California for a little high school friends trip. If you didn't know, I went to high school in Salt Lake City at East High. Shout out East High, go Leopards. So I watched it in Newport with a bunch of kids from Salt Lake who are all Utah fans, all my high school friends. So it was a miserable first, let's say, 2 hours, and then a nerve-wracking third hour with a joyous rest of the evening as me and one other kid are big BYU fans. My good buddy Devin Pendleton, who I'm sure listens to the show. Me and him were the two BYU guys holding it down. Everyone else Utah fans. And yeah, I mean, going in from Utah's perspective and talking to them, it was we're just hoping for a good game. And then it was okay, we're actually could do this. But although I will say it was a very like nervous, cautious optimism of like, how are we in the lead right now? Never really was, I felt like any there was never any big like feelings of confidence on their end, which I thought was interesting. And then BYU came back and obviously won, and it was kind of, I don't know, it was like a weird, like they didn't think that they should have been in that position to begin with, and then they were in that position and they didn't think that they ever would be, so they didn't really like know how to react. I don't know. It was a very interesting way to watch the game with just like a bunch of Utah fans, where in years past they obviously expect to win that game every year, and now it was kind of a 180 of like they didn't think that they could win. BYU had all the expectations. Me and my friend who are BYU fans are the ones that came in thinking we have to win this game, we're going to win this game, and then suddenly we weren't, which has kind of been the reverse of what's been the last decade plus, where every single time they came in thinking that they were going to win, and we suddenly found ourselves in a position to win, and that cautious optimism. But yeah, it was great. I mean, couldn't ask for like a better ending. I would have been a nightmare to spend another 2 days in Newport with a bunch of Utah fans should BYU have lost that game. So I owe my life and my happiness all to the leg of Will Ferrin and to the halftime adjustments of Jay Hill.
As do we all. As do we all. Do you hear those winds of change blowing? That's the kind of things I like to hear, Hunter. That like, because you're right. Like, it's crazy how fast things have flipped to now BYU is the team that has all the reasons to be confident. Like, Utah's cursed at this point, right?
I mean, and you love to see it. And rather than doing all that they could to reverse any sort of curse after the game, their AD went out. And I don't know if you guys already talked about this.
It was our opening theme music.
We haven't addressed it yet, though.
Yeah,
so
we haven't talked about it.
Lead us to glory, Hunter.
Talk about a big dumb idiot. This guy.
What a baby.
For starters, you showcase the fact that like you have no confidence in your team that like some miracle kickoff return could have happened. Like, you're on the field in the middle of the play. Like, who the hell do you think you are?
There's a fantasy land. There's a fantasy land where, in my head, Utah took that kickback for a touchdown,
and it
was called back because their athletic director had to go yell at the referees that I fired you already. What are you still doing here?
It really was just like a failure and the dumbest thing imaginable from the top down. Like, the hype train, we put out a tweet that talked about this. You obviously understand that like Whittingham's going to go up and talk to the media and he's going to be frustrated. The players are going to go up, they're going to talk to the media and they're going to be frustrated. But for this idiot to walk on the field during the play, before the refs even blow the final whistle and make the announcement of what the penalty was, which the penalty was on him, he's in their face and he's yelling at them and he's wagging his finger at them. And then he goes off the field and goes up to, I'm assuming, the PR staff at the University of Utah, which much of the onus of this absolute PR disaster class falls in their lap too, because they are the ones that enable him to be like, yes, here's the media room, get up on that stage behind a microphone and in front of cameras without having seen any replay 30 seconds after the game is over, and please just say what's ever on your mind. Like, it's an absolute embarrassment from the University of Utah from the top down, because this guy, he didn't think like, let me look at a replay, let's wait for the other angles to come out. He just, was upset that they lost, obviously, and he goes on a temper tantrum and embarrasses the university, embarrasses the athletic department, embarrasses the school, embarrasses the donors, the fans, the alumni. Like, everyone is like, this guy is a world-class dummy. And
Hunter can say that because he's alumni.
Is he alumni? I can say that. I thought you were saying I don't think he's alumni. I am alumni. He embarrassed alumni. From my mouth, University of Utah alum, he's an embarrassment. And it's just crazy that was ever able to happen and be allowed to happen in the first place. And when you're cursed, because there's the curse of the poo-poo comments, there's the curse of like, which rivalry game are you talking about from Whittingham, right? There's the Cam Rising curse. There's now the Cold War curse. And instead of doing everything you can to reverse these curses, the AD goes out there and probably has cursed them for another 100 years. It's baffling. It's just a PR mismanagement. And I'm shocked that like, and then he goes out and he puts out probably the dumbest statement of all time.
I'm not shocked.
No. But
Hunter,
like this guy,
he even hit him with, "I will talk to the commissioner." He pulled out the I want to talk to your manager. He literally pulled that out. He is a stereotype. He is a cliche of a cliche. And he did it anyway.
And Utah fans already don't like this guy. Like, he's not popular amongst Utah fans. And he's absolutely running every single sport in Salt Lake City into the ground, with maybe the exception of gymnastics. And if you want to say like women's basketball, like the men's basketball team got maybe 100 people at their game to kick off their season, the first year in the Big 12, the best basketball conference in the country. They got 100 people there, and they advertised, "Come get yourself an Andre Miller bobblehead," for apparently the first 2 fans, because the 12th fan through the front gates did not receive a bobblehead. And their marketing department's like, "Yeah, sorry, we'll figure it out." And they did the same. The guy did the same copy paste response to every single fan. And they're curtaining off stadiums. The football team is 1-5 now in conference play after they spent an entire offseason talking about how they were going to be the favorites. They were going to run this conference. This is the most talented team ever. Like, the guy is the world-class dummy. And it's trickling down now through the entire athletic department. And as a BYU fan, it's awesome to see. It's absolutely awesome to see. And
so
go ahead.
No, I want to walk the fans through Mark Harlan's resume. If you're not familiar with his game, I want you to pick out what his legacy is going to be, because he was the athletic director of USF when USF got left out of the Big East. When the Big East crumbled, he was USF's athletic director at the time. USF's football program and athletic department has completely crumbled. Somehow he got hired to be the AD at the University of Utah. And since then, the things he is most known for is the give me a break, freezing cold take. Mm-hmm. He was the one who was responsible, who sat on the Pac-12 board that was responsible for contacting the Utah economics professor who came up with that $50 million figure that the Pac-12 is worth and ended up destroying the conference. That was Mark Harlan. And now he's walking on the field in the middle of a play and throwing a literal temper tantrum. Well, and telling another man, this is why we fired you. Like, again, wagging his finger, invoking the manager, and also starting a sentence with, "We were really excited about being in the Big 12. Today I'm not." Because everyone knows, if you have to start a sentence with, "I was so excited to be here," but you were definitely excited to be here in the first place. I'm so happy to be married to my wife, but she didn't do the dishes, so now I'm not. It's just like, okay, were you ever really in it to begin with? Give me a break.
And if internet rumors are to be believed, he's also the guy that cost University of Utah donors like $7 million because they had to buy out Kraskowiak.
That is juicy. That is some juicy stuff. Everyone look up Andrew McCullough on Twitter, big Utah fan and all-time Mark Harlan hater, and he had a series of gems last night.
And if I can throw a fifth legacy out there, it's like going out and blocking Utah fans on Twitter. Because like apparently there's a huge portion of Utah fan base that has been blocked by this clown on Twitter. So if I to summarize, I think what his legacy will be when he's inevitably fired at the University of Utah is going to be, he will be BYU fans' favorite Utah athletic director and Utah fans' least favorite. Like, that's like everything he's done at every single turn has like embarrassed and cost and hurt the University of Utah. So they are just going to, obviously he's going to be their least favorite, and he's BYU fans' favorite athletic director of all time, behind maybe Tom Holmoe.
And we haven't even got to the point yet where you brought it up, Joe. He did call the commissioner, and the commissioner said, "Tell him to bring me my money."
That's
And the U made it rain 40 bands.
one band,
$40,000.
$10,000 for each first down picked up in the second half by the U.
My room is a mess, gentlemen, and I love it.
It turns out the billable hours of Brett Yormark is $40,000 a minute, because there's no way that phone call lasted longer than that, right?
How do you think that conversation actually went? Like, hello, Brett.
Do you think there was an actual conversation? Do you
No,
think Brett
I
Yormark
think
actually
so.
let me talk to this idiot?
So there's a great all-time Nick Saban quote where when Lane Kiffin was his OC, Nick Saban was just like laying into him on the sideline. And at the end of the game, someone asked, "Hey, Nick, what was that discussion with Lane Kiffin about?" He goes, "That wasn't a discussion. That was an ass chewing."
Yeah.
That's how that went.
And it probably went with Taylor Randall, right? Like the University of Utah president, not with.
Dude, the irony of the rival right. And I am all for a rival right. Like what I want to preface this entire discussion by saying almost every Utah fan I've ever interacted with has been awesome. Like the 10% of the bottom 10% of every fan base is going to be complete lunatics. It's just really unfortunate that your athletic director is in that bottom 10%.
I think 10% is generous. I think what separates Utah from other fan bases is with other fan bases, it's maybe 10%. With them, it's more like 15, 20.
And then there's the muss.
Because no, like legitimately, like the stadium's chanting FBYU. They go on like these other like game day shows and they chant, right? Like last year, I think McAfee show was at University of Utah and like everyone there chanted FBYU. Like that's more than 10%. And I'm also going to say that like the fans who witness like because there's a lot of stories about poor fan behavior at the game where BYU fan, like the Utah Rabbi account, right? Like who's this diehard Utah guy was like, holy cow, like the treatment of some BYU fans here was like absolutely vile. We have cheer coaches being knocked unconscious with water bottles that are being thrown from the stands. We have the Salt Lake Swagger guy. The Salt Lake Swagger belt guy like was shoved off of the seats by some unknown assailant. Like other fans were being pushed and shoved and phones being taken and thrown like up in the upper bowl. Like there's a lot of bad behavior. And I would say that like probably 80% of Utah fans who watched that all go on probably didn't say or do a single thing about it. So it's like you're not just as bad, but like you're pretty close for enabling that kind of behavior. I would have a hard time thinking that if any BYU fan did something like that at LES, that there wouldn't be 20 people immediately being like, hey, knock it off, get out of here, you idiot. Like, you know, putting an end to that. Whereas I don't necessarily think that's happening up in Salt Lake. To your point, like, again, I just watched the game with a bunch of University of Utah high school buddies, like great guys, my best friends, like all that stuff. My sister is a Utah fan. She just graduated from there. So like there still are really good Utah fans, and it's not indicative of the entire fan base. But I will say, like, for whatever reason, there seems to just be a lot more toxicity coming from the fans in Salt Lake, particularly in the last few years, than there really are from a lot of other fan bases and from what Utah fans have been like in the past.
Well, it's the attitude of it, Trevor's favorite saying, attitude reflects leadership.
Yeah,
it comes from the top. Like what example does it set for the fan base when you have an opportunity to turn down the temperature and you go out shouting, "Stop the count, stop the steal"? Like how does that look without any evidence? You claim that you are disgusted by the professionalism of the officials and that you are no longer happy to be in the Big 12 because they decided to employ what happened to be Pac-12 refs. Okay. That was a Pac-12 officiating crew. And then you have Kyle Whittingham, who instead of like he did embrace Kalani Sitake. It was a lie that Kyle didn't dap up Kalani, but he cut that conversation short just so he could yell at an official. Just so he could wag his finger at an official. He throws a chair in the postgame press conference. Like, what kind of tone does that set for your fan base when instead of going into the press conference and talking about, yeah, We didn't score any points in the second half. Yeah, we averaged 3.2 yards per play. Yeah, we gave up a 95-yard touchdown drive. And yeah, we gave up 60 yards in 3 plays. But the game was stolen from us by one officiating call, which was the correct call.
Which was the correct call in every angle sense. Like, I'll agree. Like, the initial replay and the only replay they showed on the TV broadcast looked like questionable at best.
I agree.
But then subsequent
glance, I didn't think it was a hold.
Subsequent angles and other replays have shown that, like, yeah, correct call. And you can even notice that because Utah fans have changed their tone from it wasn't a holding to, well, it might have been a holding, but they haven't been calling that all season, which is just ridiculous kind of defense.
Which then you have the rules analyst for NBC going and watching the all 22 from every pass play on that. And he comes out and says, hey, I watched every single pass play. There wasn't anything like that the entire game. There was no inconsistency with how the refs called that game.
But then you also have like Whittingham saying Jacob Robinson injured Brant Keithy on a dirty, like it was a dirty play. Like when then replay comes out and show that he actually got hurt on a play before that. And he just tried to play through it. And then it was when he got tackled that he was like, I can't, like.
Well, you see him coming out of his break, his knee buckles. It was a non-contact injury.
Yeah,
and then he goes,
not even on the same play.
And again, without saying anything, he just throws it out there that, I think he got tackled from behind, which leads a bunch of Utah fans to go online, post the video, and then have the nerve to say that Jacob Robinson was a dirty player who was also taunting Keithy at the end of that play, when to my eyes, it looked like he was just like, whoa, dude, you good?
Yeah. So to summarize, he gets hurt non-contact on a play that isn't even the play that they're talking about. The head coach comes out and says, dirty play, injured him. Utah fans, of course, are like, Whittingham said it was a dirty play, so it's a dirty play. And they go out and, there are some fans being like, we need to do a GoFundMe for a Kansas player that will injure Jacob Robinson, or, we need to put a hit out on different BYU football players and injure them intentionally in dirty plays. Like, this is the fan base that we're dealing with as a result of their coach recklessly going out and being like, yeah, it was a dirty hit before he even saw a single replay or a single, second of recap of what actually happened. Didn't talk to Brant, didn't say like, hey, were you hurt on that tackle? Like, there's no sort of backstory or investigation on his part, or even a simple rewatch of the play till he went out there and accused BYU players of being dirty. And of course, the fan base takes that and runs with it. You have the athletic director obviously yelling at the refs and saying the game was stolen. And so that's how the fan base thinks of it, that the game was stolen, and the biased refs. The athletic director says, we're not excited to be in the Big 12. And so the fan base is like, yeah, screw the Big 12, this G5 conference, this conference sucks. And going back to the initial Pac-12 collapse and Big 12 move of him being like, oh yeah, like this isn't happening. And so the fan base obviously says like, it's not happening. No way they'd ever leave the Pac-12. So it's just a fan base that takes on this persona and this identity that their head coach and their athletic director have taken on. And because their head coach and their athletic director are whiny, vindictive people who just can't stand to lose to BYU or can't stand to lose at all, that's all they can think about, and that's all that they've become. It's crazy to watch.
Well, and you even go back to like the timeout. Like, there is like physical video evidence that Kalani leans over and he calls timeout to the referee. Like, they showed it on ESPN before the ball was snapped, and no one wants to talk about that because, again, it's all about something getting stolen from me. Like, it's just one of those things where, like, bless my mom, like, as I was raised, we were told to lose with grace. Like, don't be sore losers. Like, if you lost, you lost, but they just can't let it go. Like, do you know how bad you have to be and how bad you have to act that Gordon Monson releases an article that defends BYU? Gordon Monson. Like,
when you've lost
Gordon
moral
Monson,
high ground to Gordon Monson, that's
he will just drag BYU through the mud at any chance he can get. The backhanded comments about the church, the backhanded comments about the football team, You name it, he's done it. He was pro BYU. That was how embarrassing Utah fans acted that Gordon Monson said, no, I cannot go on this journey, this venture with you, because it is so left field. I can't do it. That is where we are at. Just immature behavior.
But do you know what it is? It's fans trying to hold on, pun intended, to any reason why they lost that isn't their team's fault. Anything that they can hold on to that doesn't say my team sucked and BYU just beat us. That's it. It's anything. It's anything they can say. And like, and in the spirit of full honesty, like when I saw the penalty, I thought it was weak, like because I didn't see the other angles. If I was a Utah fan, I would be furious that was called. Like, and Utah fans coming out today and be like, "Oh, don't act holier than thou." Like, if you were in the same position, you'd be saying the same thing. I mean, probably. Like, there's going to be idiot fans on both sides that when things don't go their way are going to try and blame things that aren't in their control. But if anything, like, there's video evidence. It was a hold. And so rather than be upset with the official for calling the play, why not be upset that the foul was committed? Because it was committed. And if you get a speeding ticket, you're not going to get upset with the officer because he didn't pull you for speeding the 15 other times that you sped down that highway, to quote our friend Johnny Linehan. But like, again, it's just like, it's anything that isn't our fault. And it's that kind of shirking accountability that is probably the reason that Utah is on their longest losing streak in the last 8 years, right? And the reason I know this is what they're doing is because I've been there. And this is what's going to hurt the most Utah fans to hear. Over the last 5 years, you have proven that you are just like us. The fan base that you act so superior towards, that Kyle Whittingham and Mark Harlan show no respect for, our program, our fan base, all that stuff, you are just like us. All the things that you hated us, all the things you've hated us for the last 40 years, from the preseason national championships to crowning every halfway, like mid quarterback we've ever had to be a Heisman Trophy contender, from complaining about referees, from discrediting a rival's great season because they did it in a weak conference. Do any of these things sound familiar? It's because, like, we know this because we wrote the book on it. We are the standard that you have claimed to hate, the holier than thou comments at church and the moral superiority that you feel just because you wear a different colored t-shirt. We wrote the book on that. And the only difference between you and me is that my program has actually done some of those things that we claim. My program can sometimes claim a preseason national championship because they know what it's like to actually win one. We can claim that our quarterback is a Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback. Why? Because we've actually had a Heisman Trophy caliber quarterback. And you guys are just cosplaying as BYU fans. Poorly, I might add, while also throwing water bottles at our cheerleaders, refusing to say our name, team down south, team up, like whatever, going and crying at press conferences saying that the game cheated. You know what that sounds like to me? Little brother.
The littlest brother.
Like every single game I've ever seen that I play, like every single game that I played with my little brother growing up, where you know what it was? You know what Mark Harlan did? He quit the game.
He rage quit.
He rage quit. BYU scored on the final play, and rather than play out until the clock hit 0, Mark Harlan turned off the Xbox.
Walked onto the field.
He tried to.
Walked onto the field while the game was still going. There was still a chance.
A Utah player was actively running with the ball, and he was like walking at midfield.
Little
crazy.
Smith Snowden was running for his life. Like,
there was like a chance. There was like a half a second where it was
Hunter.
There was half a second where he was, where it was like, oh, hold on. But enough about Utah, because BYU won, and BYU's 9-0, and BYU's ranked number 7, and
Hear,
Utah
hear.
hasn't even beat Utah hasn't even beat BYU in 5 years. So enough about them. I'm sick of them. I don't want to hear about them for the rest of the season, although I do kind of hope that they beat Colorado this week. BYU, I mean, is that a top 4 rivalry game of all time?
I mean,
Like,
my
obviously
lifetime-
06, 07, and 09, like, those are the 3. And then it's this one? Like, does this surpass 2021?
I'm going to say no, because 2021 was the more dominant win of the two. Like, that was the first
But I'm
game
just
in
saying,
9
like,
years
best.
where it's
Like,
just like
obvious dominant
And-
wins.
and like that's I mean, they won a game at the Horn. Like, how can that not be the mirror? Like, it has a name. It's the Holy War.
It's their third, like, win on the final play of the game in rivalry since 2006.
In terms of
I guess it
finishes,
wasn't
like,
final play, but
I would say absolutely. And again, like, I think
with what was at stake? Because there was way more at stake in this game than in
That's
21.
the kicker right there.
the
Will
stakes
Ferentz
to come out of this
you know what I'm
game, the stakes that were there to come out and win this game is probably the single most mentally tough thing I've ever seen from a BYU team. To be down 11 at halftime in that environment, and you outscore the home team 12-0 in the second half, and then rip their hearts out when
to do it on the road.
Dead. You were dead. You were dead 3 different times.
Yeah,
I mean,
the second time where they got the ball down 2 and, like, went 3 and out and had to punt it back, and Utah, like, got it at midfield. You're just thinking, like, that was the chance. You had 1 timeout. There was like 2.5 minutes remaining, right? Like, that was your chance, and somehow, some way, BYU was able to get the ball back and went downfield. And
So what's the image? What's the image that we're posting 20 years later from this game? Because, like, the 4th and 18, the Harleen, the missed tackles on Andrew George, what's the picture that's going to stand the test of time?
I mean, it's got to be Will Ferentz kicking it.
Or the smile.
Like, even though that wasn't, like, really kind of like, I mean, it was the play that won it, but I don't know. Like, which, because there wasn't just like one iconic moment. It was the sum of a bunch of, like, little iconic moments.
Which, again, is just like, it's a microcosm of the BYU team.
Yeah, Keelan Marion getting the touchdown, kick return for a touchdown in the first half when BYU offense could barely move the ball. Interception in the third quarter. I think, just getting those stops on, like, what was it, like 3rd and 5 on the last possession that BYU got the stop. Obviously Chase, like, making that catch for 30 yards after the holding call. Because, like, the holding call got BYU to, like, the 15-yard line. Like, it wasn't like that's what put them in field goal range. Like, they still had to go, like, at least, like, 50, 60 yards to even get into field goal range with 1.5 minutes and no timeouts.
If not for the Oklahoma State game, this probably would have been the ballsiest drive of the last 20 years.
Yeah. Well, trying to think of how long 20 years ago was. I mean,
there's
second
some
second.
Fine, we'll say last 15. We'll say last 15 years.
Yeah. Probably.
Yeah.
Like, I can't think of another one.
The Baylor one would have been good if Jake Oldring made the field goal.
So there is because we asked for calls. Let me see who this is from. This is from Grant Casper. Just kind of talking about just the rivalry game, recapping it, reacting to it. And I think he talks about kind of like Will Ferentz and, like, where this kind of ranks. So hopefully you guys can hear this, but I'm going to play it.
What a season this has been. Top 5 season in BYU history. And the story is still being told. I think it's time to extend to Kalani. Beyond time, build him a statue, name the field after him, whatever it takes. Just get that man signed up. Let's keep him here forever. And let's just keep this train rolling. We're going to play a better team this Saturday night Well, Velodrome Stadium's going to be packed. Let's go 10-0, baby.
So he's
Love
not even saying
let's
like
get-
top
We
five.
gotta have him on the show more often. He knows how to play this game.
He knows exactly what the hype train will be here. We were talking about like, is this a top 5 rivalry win of all time? And he's already saying like this is a top 5 BYU football season of all time after that win. Got to see how it plays out. In my opinion, we got to see how it plays out.
See how it ends.
It could get there, but again, I'm not like in terms of like what this means for like if we're going to talk about like what this means for the larger season, I almost like don't care to like, I like in my mind, I said it kind of at the top, but like the Holy War, the fact that it counts towards the team's overall records is simply a coincidence. Like
you almost have to separate this accomplishment from the season.
Exactly.
Like, regardless of how the season plays out, like this win needs to be looked at through its own kind of, microscope.
It just like the only stat that matters in this game is the W. Like the success rate chart that made the rounds on Twitter, the box score, like I do not care what any of those numbers say, because all that matters is in 20 years when we're looking at the Winsipedia, it has a W next to BYU's name. That's really all that matters to me. And so I'm not going to read too much into like the offensive struggles, the fact that they got rattled in that environment. This is a one-off situation, and they more than made up for it at the end of the game, where when it really mattered, this BYU team was nails. And so there's nothing about this that really worries me about, I guess, the rest of the season, if that makes sense. But I mean, weird
things happen in rivalry games all the time. And especially when it's like one team is really good and highly ranked and has all the expectations, and the other team is playing with nothing to lose, right? Like 2007, Pitt beats West Virginia when West Virginia was like the second ranked team in the country. Final week of the year, looked like they were, Pat McAfee was their kicker. They were going to win the game. Pitt wasn't that great. They were going to go to a national championship, and Pitt upsets West Virginia. Happens all the time in the Iron Bowl, right? Like even just this last year, it took a crazy like 4th and 20, 4th and goal from the 20 touchdown in the final seconds for Alabama to beat a really bad Auburn team. It's just like rivalry games are weird. Weird things happen. That all that matters in these situations is escaping with a win. And so I wholeheartedly agree. It's like this game is its own accomplishment and its own victory. The season is like almost just a separate thing that's also happening in conjunction with this. But, doesn't matter how this season plays out. BYU could lose another game. They could end up not winning the conference, not going to a playoff, like whatever. That's not going to detract, I think, from how we look at and talk about this win because of how awesome it was.
Well, and I think one thing too that I feel like gets overlooked in all of this, like Joe, you brought up like looking at the box score. BYU, the defense at least played really one bad quarter. Gave up 3 touchdowns in the second quarter, but they still forced 3 turnovers. BYU, despite some of their best efforts at times, to be honest, didn't turn the ball over once, and just did things that were like, I know the game felt out of hand at times, but BYU still did things necessary to win. Like for the 9-game win streak, Utah had all of the turnovers. They had all the lucky breaks. They had, everything else. Jake Retzlaff still threw for 219 yards on a terrible attempt to completion percentage. I mean, it was under 50%, but he still did what he needed to do. The receivers I thought were great, especially I thought JoJo Phillips was awesome. One of the underrated plays of the game. Jake Retzlaff talked about it after the game, but JoJo went up to catch the ball, realized halfway up that he's like, this ball might not actually be for me, and pulled his hands down because it was meant for Chase. We picked up another 15 yards just on that play alone. But Keelan Marion, special teams, Kelly Papinga, they made plays. It was just, I know statistically it's not maybe what we wanted and it wasn't pretty, but BYU still outgained Utah by over 100 and something yards.
I mean, to your point, they had a bad quarter. Utah dominated BYU for a quarter, and then the rest of the game played out exactly like I thought it would.
Grant talks about extending Kalani, and obviously like that Kalani's going to get an extension after this year. I don't think there's really any debate about it. Was this like the best and worst game of Kalani's career? Because it's like everything that like is frustrating about him was shown, front and center, and everything that's also great about him was shown front and center. Like the team's ability to rally, the team's, belief in themselves and confidence and find a way to win late. Like those are all good qualities of Kalani coached teams. Those were all shown obviously in the end of the game. At the same time, like the lack of preparedness and just nerves to come out into the game showed themselves. And my gosh, like the end of the first half was the worst clock management, worst run 2-minute drill, worst use of timeouts that I've maybe ever seen. Right, like to not have plays
100%.
called to get to the line and not realize that you either have to have a second play called or spike the ball. Like they just didn't know what they were doing, and just the usage of timeouts obviously is what put them in that situation, which are things that BYU fans obviously wish Kalani Sitake was a lot better at. But it is funny, like the juxtaposition of like the Kalani's best traits as a coach were shown, and Kalani's worst traits maybe as a coach were shown.
It was
Go ahead, Trev.
Well, I was just gonna say it's just reminds me of that scene from Pirates of the Caribbean. Like this is you are the worst rivalry win I've ever seen, and you just pan over to Kalani's like, but we did win though.
Yeah.
Like,
well, it was the scene. It's Christmas time. It was the scene from White Christmas that I posted on Twitter, where it's like he's berating his soldiers, and he goes, "You're weak. You're soft. You're sloppy. You're undisciplined." And I've never seen anything so beautiful in my whole life. Like that's kind of how I feel about the Kalani Sitake experience in some ways. But my answer to that, Hunter, is it's the Mike Tyson phrase, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And BYU got punched in the mouth by the environment, by the physicality of Utah, by the mental edge that Utah had coming right out the gate. Like to me, I don't want to say that BYU wasn't prepared from like a game plan perspective, because BYU still had open receivers pretty much all night. Like the offensive line got absolutely demolished in this game for the most part. But like, I don't think A-Rod necessarily called a horrible game. There were obviously some plays that didn't work out. There's obviously a lot of mismanagement on substitutions, which allowed Utah to kind of do their slow roll substitution, which cost BYU some timeouts. Like those are all things that in my mind, those are unique to this game because the environment was so loud. You could see Jake coming over to the sideline during one of those timeouts and saying like, I can't hear. So the false starts were crowd noise 100%. Like if anything, it wasn't a game plan issue. It was the attitude that we saw a week in the media that like, it's just another game, when like that's neither helpful nor honest in my opinion, because everyone knows that's not just another game. But because you're not allowed to admit it, you come out and you start playing a little tight because you're trying to pretend like, hey guys, this isn't that big of a deal. And then you start making mistakes and internally you're like, oh crap, this is a huge deal. And so you just start pressing a little bit harder. Like that false start at the end of the half where Jake had no idea, like he lines up in the shotgun and then seems to remember at the last second, oh shoot, I got to spike this. What that tells me is he's thinking too hard. Like what that tells me is he was trying way too hard not to choke and panic in that moment, and it led to panic and choking.
And that he was not prepared for the moment, which I think falls onto the coaching, like especially now, because you have the direct communication from the coaches to the players. As a coach, you either have to have the play call ready. The quarterback needs to have 2 plays already called going into that previous play, or he needs to know that like this play and then spike the ball. The fact that he got to that situation and didn't know, like was about to run a play and then was like, wait, no, actually spike it. Like he was ill prepared going into not just that play, but the previous play. Because as a quarterback, you need to understand like, okay, this play, 15 yards, clock's going to stop on the first down, get up to the ball and spike it, or get up to the ball and run the next play that's already called. And the fact that he didn't know what he was supposed to do in that situation tells me that the coaches didn't have him ready for that situation.
No, and I agree. I 100% agree with you. And I think, but again, I think it was because mentally they weren't, like, they just weren't prepared for the emotions of the moment, because I think they were being told to downplay those emotions. Like they were being told to pretend that moment didn't exist. And I think that was the mistake.
It's just disingenuous. Like, you can't try to pretend like this is just a regular game when everyone in the world, including the players, like the players aren't idiots. They know it's not just another game.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing. Like, Utah came out hot because they leaned into that. Like, yeah. I think at the end of the day, BYU showed that they were the better, more talented team once they settled in. But like, Utah came out hot because their coaches brought in old players. Their coach really leaned, like their coaching staff really leaned into, this is the history of the Holy War. This is why this game matters. We don't lose to BYU. And they came out with that kind of mental edge, and ultimately it wasn't enough, but like, again, it's just like,
it was almost enough.
But in a weird way, I find great comfort in the fact that BYU played objectively their worst game of the season and won anyway. And it wasn't, like, to Trevor's point to open the show, it wasn't enough. Like, you took every single, like, speaking of getting punched in the mouth, BYU was on the canvas multiple times in that game. They got up, put their mouthpiece back in, and swung back harder. Like, that's what I love about this BYU team. Again, it sucks that you didn't get it. We could have used that field goal at the end of the first half. We could have used a touchdown on one of those field goal drives, and this game doesn't feel as close as it ended up being. But like we said, it's just win. Just win. That's all that really matters in this game.
So sorry, go ahead, Trevor.
Oh no, you're good. All I was gonna say is just, like, I can't give, this is just kind of, take this where you want to go, Hunter, obviously. But the thing that's just been in my mind just ever since that game ended was just the amount of times our defense started, like, with the Utah offense starting at like their 40 or closer.
Twice in the second half.
And it's just, you allowed 4 first downs in the entire second half. And it's just, like, I know, obviously he was referring to Will Ferrin, but Greg Wrubell saying where there's a will, there's a way. Like, that's all that second half was. I think that's, like, been the word that I've been trying to reach for and grasp this entire time for this second half. And it was just an absolute iron will to not lose, to that everything that they worked for, everything that they had achieved up to this point was not going to go to waste, and it wasn't going to go to waste in Salt Lake. And I just look at, in that moment, you look at Kalani, you look at the team coming together, and at the beginning of all of this, when they brought Kalani in, he said his biggest goal was to be the Polynesian Kalani. And that just he is the Polynesian Kalani, the Polynesian Lavelle Edwards. And like, that's what that looked like. Like, just a team that, despite, in Lavelle's case, like, despite being in a conference that wasn't respected, despite him starting, the revolution of the forward pass, and everybody thinking that was ridiculous, and, maybe reaching out past what BYU was used to before, getting athletes of other religions, like bringing in a group of guys, coaching them hard, like having hardcore assistants to do his job while he led kind of with that quiet, stoic behavior. Like, that was last night. Like, BYU has been in this Big 12 conference for 2 years, and they are doing things that no one expected them to do. It doesn't look the way that anybody else wants it to look. Clearly, if you look at, like, the committee still doesn't respect them. After the game last Saturday that they won, by the way, like, one of the analysts put them now in the Valero Bowl rather than in a conference or a college football playoff game. Like, this is, like, the perfect dichotomy of, like, what Lavelle's BYU was. They're doing things that don't make any sense, and yet they keep winning, and it's driving people insane. And so, like, good job, Kalani. Like,
it's because we're Jesus's favorite team, Trevor.
you were coached by the man, and now you're replicating it, and just keep going.
So,
Like it's amazing. I love it so much. Like I can't keep a smile off my face. It's the best.
if I can just jump in, and one, nailed it. Two, you talked about the short fields, like how nails the defense was in the second half. This is not going to be talked about enough, but on Utah's final 2 offensive possessions, all they needed was a field goal on one of their 2 offensive possessions. Those 2 possessions started on the BYU 46 and the Utah 46 and the BYU 49. Those drives combined 6 plays, -6 yards.
Like all they needed was 15 yards in one of those drives. And
they got -6,
Yeah.
to quote Mrs. Puff. You
Yeah,
got 6.
Jay Hill, like,
Just
if
so
I had to
close,
say who
man.
the MVP was, it was just Jay Hill. And you had obviously that atrocious second quarter. Brandon Rose looked like a capable quarterback for the first time in his career. And, the defense was missing tackles and just wasn't great. And he went in at halftime and came out and said, no more, and they're the reason that BYU even had a chance to win to begin with. We talk about Lavelle. We talk about just like BYU teams. This next voicemail that we got from Brooks kind of talks a little bit about BYU teams of past, and it's like 2 minutes long, so I might end it after a little bit. But there's an interesting part that I think is maybe worth just addressing as far as like BYU teams as a whole goes. So I'll play that for you guys.
I love this so much.
Wow, where do we start? BYU Utah game, crazy. Obviously, another one for the archives. It was just a barn burner, super fun. It was nice to get out of Rice Eccles with a victory, and just the silence in the crowd. The kick return that hushed the crowd up, and then it was loud and crazy until the very last seconds of the game, and then the complete meltdown of Utah. I hate to say it, but it's been funny to watch, and it just kind of encapsulates their whole season, in a nutshell, I think. And so that's been wild. To be honest, this season reminds me a little bit different situation, but COVID season, and we live out of state, buy season tickets every year. And that year we couldn't come down to games and ended up watching a lot on TV. And truthfully, that was one of the things that was something we just consistently did as a family. We sat down to watch the football games. It brought a lot of joy and happiness. And it was just one of those traditions that we, really kind of cherished during that time when things were weird and, locked down. And this year it's kind of different situation, obviously, but it's been fun because this team has brought a ton of joy to my family, and we're talking about it. My wife, who's not even a football fan, was asking what was going on with the AD at Utah, and what happened, and why the coach is slamming chairs, and why is the guy walking on the field? She was getting into the details of it all, the drama of it all.
I think it's interesting. It goes on for another 30 seconds, but an interesting point of like, hey, in 2020, like we sat down and we watched a lot of BYU football games. And now this year is having kind of that same effect where we're sitting together, and I'm sure it's not unique to just his family, but families, really across all of Utah and across all of the country, of like this BYU football team and this BYU football season. And I think this Utah game in particular are creating just a whole new generation of like BYU football fans, right? And when I think about like the first year that I really sat down and I watched BYU football was 2006. I was 10 years old. I just turned 10 years old. Went to BYU football games. I just moved to Utah, and just like going to every BYU football home game that season with my grandpa. Watched every single game, and really, that season finished with an 11-2 record. And they did a lot of winning. John Beck was awesome. Obviously, Curtis Brown. I think Zach Colley, Johnny Harleen. Like, it was just an awesome BYU football team. And they did a lot of winning, which obviously as a kid and as a fan, like that's what you like to watch. It's hard to get into a sport by watching a team that loses. And then obviously just, capped off with the 2006 Beck to Harleen win over Utah in Rice Eccles Stadium. And like, when I think back to the turning point in my life that like made me a BYU fan, it was that season, and it was watching that team. And I think, 2020, I'm sure did that for some BYU fans. to watch Zach Wilson and then him to go number 2 overall in the draft. But I think even more so than that season, like this season and this team, and I think that game and moment against Utah is really kind of creating this new generation of BYU fans. We saw the Utah player who talked about like, yeah, like I grew up, a BYU fan, and BYU was never beating them, so I decided to go to the winning side, and that's why he ended up going to Utah. I think now, like these kids that are watching and these kids that are, getting into football or have been into football, but they really haven't had a whole lot of reason to watch BYU or to really become obsessed with BYU like the three of us are. I think that's all happening to a whole lot of people and a whole lot of families and a whole lot of kids this season, which is just like awesome to think about. And anytime you can get a Utah win, especially in the manner that they got the Utah win this last week, I think just does infinitely more to just get kids like obsessed with this team and obsessed with the school, just like, the 2006 football team did for me.
Well, and it's just one of those things where like this team is just like the COVID team, like they and the 2006 team, I think they all have, things in common. And to be clear, disclaimer before I continue, I'm not insinuating that other teams didn't have this, like other teams that, maybe weren't as successful or whatever, but just like something that's just very palpable with, the 2020 team and this 2024 team was just how easy it is to, like, you just want them to be successful, like, and not even just in football, like Zach Wilson, like a lot of us really attached ourselves to him. Like, and when I say a lot of us, like me included, like when he got drafted, like you
Trevor rooted for the Jets for 3 years.
That's how bad it got.
That's how
bad it got. Like you wanted them to have success. Like I wanted Lopini to be able to go, and you guys relax.
Almost slipped up.
I wanted like.
Zach Wilson had a lot of that. So
yeah, you guys, you wanted all of them to just succeed because they were overcoming so much hardship, and especially during that COVID season, like the world was struggling with this pandemic, and BYU's piecing together this schedule, and not only are they playing a lot of football, but they're winning a lot of games. They're doing things that other teams aren't doing. They're traveling across country in 2 days notice. We're all cheering on the truck driver to get down there, and like all of a sudden, like I'm following him on Twitter and he's still doing his thing. And then like you get to this season, and not only are they already overcoming the odds of Vegas and the analysts that are hating on Jake Retzloff, and just overcoming all this doubt, whether it's from the media to their own fans, frankly. But they're just turning around and they're just giving it back. You mentioned, Hunter, these new generations of kids. Like you've got kids like Joey, who, was the true blue hero this last Thursday. He comes in there, and just the amount of energy that like Harrison Taggart brought, he was the one handing out all of the swag. But the players, every time that Joey threw up the Y, would just go absolutely ballistic. Pretty soon, Joey's cartwheeling with Cosmo. Everyone's freaking out. Kalani's jumping up and down like he just won the lottery. And Joey pulls out a sign that says, "Beat BYU, you can do it." And what do? They put it in their locker room. And like right where they walk in every day, and that's there for 2 days. And then they bring it to the stadium. And it's just like, you see guys like that acting that way, and they're nailing their interviews, and they're just doing all of these things, and you just want them to succeed because they're just doing it the right way. Like we spent 30 minutes talking about Utah doing everything the wrong way, and it's like the complete opposite of that at BYU right now. Like they are handling the off the field stuff perfectly, with humility, with love. Like they are literally loving and learning, which has not always been a positive term on this show. And they're nailing the on-field stuff too, even if it takes them 58 minutes to figure it out. And so this team, like before the Utah game, was going to be special for me. I think I mentioned that back in week 6 when they beat Arizona. But now that you have the rivalry win on top of it, and they just continue to just look out for for the people that are cheering him on. They had Joey sign literally after the game. They were dancing around that. Like they're not forgetting who they are and who they're representing. And I think that's what 2020 did. I think that's what 2024 is doing now. And it's just go Cougs, man. Like they are everything I want my football team to be and represent. And they're just up to this point, like 10 out of 10, man.
In like 15 years, when Joe's nephew Cade is hosting the Hype Train podcast, to the disappointment of Joe's parents and sister, like this team is going to be the team that like him and his friends, look back on and they're like, man, that 2024 team, so sick. Like Jake Retzloff at quarterback, Darius Lassiter and Chase Roberts are going to be there. Austin Colley's. It's just, going to be awesome. Isaiah Glasgow is their Brian Keel, right? And LJ Martin is their version of Harvey Unga or Curtis Brown. Like this is a team that defines kind of the generation of BYU football fans that's coming up right now. So it's just really cool to think about like 15 years from now. And again, I think that doesn't even depend on how the rest of the season plays out. I think through 9 games, it's been that special and that magical and that wild of a ride that BYU, could lose a game, lose in the Big 12 championship, and it still is going to be viewed as a team that defined a generation of BYU fans. And they're going to look back on it the way that you and I and you, Joe, look back on 06, 07, 2009. And it just like, it's not even just BYU football, but like, I think BYU basketball has a chance to do it too, right? Like Yegor Demon is the most fun BYU basketball player I've seen since Jimmer Fredette, and he's only played 2 games. And it might just get even better over the next few weeks. So it's just like, it's a heck of an era, like to be a BYU football fan.
I mean, that was a beautiful from both of you, and a beautiful voicemail. Like makes me want to cry, honestly, just because I think about like
I
all
wish
Saturday.
My wife would get as into it as that guy's wife asking about the athletic director.
No, like, but that's the thing. Like, when people say like, but before the game, my stomach was in knots, and I just heard over and over again from people, it's like, it's just a game, like it's just a game, and it's like, but it's not, right? Because sports are like, this stuff matters. Like that game mattered to Joey. Mm-hmm. Like that matters to someone who's going through the things that Joey does. Like that win means something. And I think about like the impact that it's had on my family and my friends. Like to your point, Hunter, about like a new generation of BYU fans, I think it's reinvigorated old generations of BYU fans too, because now it's cool to be a BYU fan again. I'm walking around Salt Lake, Utah County, and people are wearing BYU stuff again. And that used to not be a thing. We have family dinner on Sunday with my wife's family, and all they want to talk about is Utah's athletic director and the fine. And we're laughing about the game and how, miraculous it was. And these are people who, like my wife's family, like they're sports fans, but they're not that big of sports fans. But like, that's what we wanted to talk about for 2 hours. Like today at work, I walked by one of my coworkers' desks and he's watching Kalani's media availability on Twitter. I have lunch with 2 of the partners today where I only mention their titles to show that, like, financially, professionally, we have nothing in common except BYU football. And we went to lunch and for an hour just reminisced on all our favorite moments of being a BYU fan, like them talking about what it was like to be at the Ty Detmer Miami game and what it was like watching BYU win the Cotton Bowl in '96. And I'm talking about, what it was like watching the 2009 win over Utah. And we're all 3 of us are reveling in this win over Utah on Saturday. Like, sports is the great connector, and BYU football has been an amazing connector this year for a lot of families. And it's creating lifelong family memories for adults and kids alike. It's creating unifying elders quorum lessons, depending on what ward you go to. Like it's like every single one of those students that flooded the streets of Provo, honking their horns and playing music and driving down the street with BYU flags, running out of the tailgate. You tell them that this is just a game. You tell them that this it doesn't matter. That the outcome of these games don't matter. Like I can't quantify why it matters or give you a rational explanation for why this makes a difference in people's lives, but it just does. And like I'm just grateful that sports is the one thing that none of us have to explain to each other. We just get it. Like we just get that. Like people can watch my coworkers can watch the video of me freaking out after that kick goes in, and instead of being like, "Man, this guy's nuts," they're all like, "I get it. That was me too." Like it's just cool, man. Like I'm really grateful for this season. I wish we've DM'd a bunch of players trying to get them on the show, but like I'm mostly eager to get them on the show just so I can thank them for giving me these wonderful memories that I'm going to have for the rest of my life. Like no matter what, like how future seasons turn out, I can look back and say, we had 2024 and the season's not over yet. So, Andy from The Office talking about, I wish you could tell you were in the good old days before you're out of them. And we're in them right now, guys. So enjoy every second while you got it.
Yeah, I think, well, like just to echo what you said, Joe, like look at this podcast. Like started like a couple guys that kind of knew each other from Twitter, ended up in a group chat because we were just kind of like, you know what, we talk enough. We might as well make it a little bit more accessible rather than filling each other's mentions all the time. And, 4 years later, episode 100, like here we are. And I'm on this screen, not to get too mushy, but like looking at two brothers who I love. Like anybody listening to this podcast, like I need you to understand, like Joe Eat and Hunter and Chandler, and, we've brought Jackson Payne along the way, like Nate Slack, like all of these guys, like I love these guys. And I hope for their success. And we cheered when Hunter got a new car, and I'm cheering when Joe got into his new house and was there when he met Michaela, and me and my wife went on a date with them to Everforest or whatever it's called. And just like, it's all brought to us by BYU sports, and specifically BYU football. And the fans that listen to this podcast, like we appreciate you. Like the response we've gotten from our YouTube channel has been so positive. And like, we just like want you to know that like you have helped create these relationships as well. Like if no one was listening, like if no one cared, if no one interacted with us on Twitter, like it's just hard to maintain any sort of momentum if no one cares. But like the fact of the matter is we've got people listening. And because of that, like Hunter is like just an A+ content creator. And Saturday night was just killing it on the Twitter posts, like just unbelievable work. And Joe does the same thing. And because of the fans, like I decided to just dabble in video editing before the season started and throw together some hype videos. Like that's on you guys. Like Donovan Mitchell, like this is on you. Like this is your fault, and we just like, I just appreciate you guys so much, Joe and Hunter, but also like the listeners, and the fact that we've reached 100 episodes. And I could be on here as a goofball and just talk for BYU sports now even on this podcast for an hour and 25 minutes. Like it's an opportunity that you have allotted us that I'm just really, really grateful for. And I just couldn't let the 100th episode go by without letting, you two brothers know that, but also let the fans know that we just appreciate you guys. Like we're loving and learning along the way too. And, it's been awesome. Like 100 episodes, and here's to 1,000 more, man. Like it's great.
Just guys being dudes, man.
I don't know how to follow that. Other than just like
about Kansas. Just kidding.
I honestly, I don't know if there's going to be any game preview.
No, there's not, other than Cougs by a billion.
Cougs by a billion is our preview. But like, I think what Trevor was talking about answers what Joe's question was prior, where like, why does this matter? And I think it's not necessarily the on-field result that matters, but it's the on-field result that impacts off the field is what like ultimately matters, right? Like we all have become friends, and as Trevor so accurately described, like brothers here because of BYU sports. I think Jackson Payne met his wife in the rock line, right, because of BYU sports, and I think it matters a whole lot regardless of if BYU wins or loses. This is our 100th episode. We've talked about BYU beating Baylor in overtime. We've talked about BYU basketball, fraud or squad last year. We've also talked about BYU getting their doors blown off by Liberty. We've talked about some of the lows along the line as well. We've had BYU football players on, right? Like we've had, I think, Keanu Hill, Mason Wake, Max Tooley, LJ Martin, Jake Retzloff. Like we've had player interviews. Trevor's done like the face-to-face time with a bunch of basketball players as well.
We went on a cruise.
We went on a cruise with BYU football players. I did an emergency podcast from the closet of my family's place in St. George when Mark Pope announced that he was leaving, and we had a celebration when Kevin Young was hired as the head coach.
And I, by the way, I did not forget you stealing my whole freaking flow before the alumni game.
I don't know what you're talking about there. We haven't always agreed, right? Like Trevor and I have gotten in some good debates. Joe and I have gotten in some good debates. But every single episode has been fun. And every even after the losses, there's just nothing more fun than coming on and talking BYU sports. And, again, Trevor talked about it a lot better than I could ever talk about it, but that's all due to the listeners and, the more than 1,000 people that have been watching our YouTube videos, the hundreds and hundreds of people that download each and every single episode that we post on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever it may be. It's easy to talk sports with, your friends in a group chat. And don't worry, we do that a whole lot as well, in addition to this podcast. But the fact that there's even just, 5 people out there outside of Joe's, wonderful mother and my mom, and I'm sure Trevor's parents too, that listen, and that there's anyone out there that cares about like what we have to say on the matter when it comes to BYU athletics is just mind blowing. And the fact that there's so many people that care about what we have to say is even, can't even wrap my head around it. But, for some reason, there's a whole lot of people that tune in every Tuesday nights or sometimes Wednesdays or Monday nights that want to know what Joe, Trevor, and I, and, Chandler and Jackson have to say on the state of BYU athletics. And the only reason that I think we've even gotten to 100 episodes is because of all the people that listen and download and interact with us on Twitter. So shout out to all of them. It makes it really, really fun to come on and talk about BYU even after a loss. And when BYU wins, it makes it a hell of a lot more fun than that. So I appreciate all of them. And I appreciate BYU for winning so often too.
Desk pop, mic drop for Hunter.
Is your first desk pop?
It's not my 5th today.
I mean, I gotta say it too. Like we love you guys, our listeners. And I'm glad that I've gotten to meet so many of you. Just out in the wild at the basketball game, I probably ran into like 5 or 6 people that just knew me from the podcast and from Twitter. And it's just fun because it's a connector, right? Like we got really involved with it during COVID, when connection was kind of at an all-time low, and look what it sprouted. And so we genuinely cannot thank you enough. As I look back to, my number one dream was to play football for BYU. And unfortunately I wasn't a good enough athlete to be that, but my second dream was to cover BYU in some way through broadcasting or writing or whatever. And I get to do both, because of you. And so I genuinely cannot say thank you enough for helping me live my dream. Thanks for reading all of my content and listening to all our podcasts and all of that stuff. I have no idea why any of you guys care what any of us have to say, because we know zero ball. But the reason everyone keeps coming back is because of that community, because sports matter. And it's just something that people from all walks of life, it's just something that they can connect on. They know nothing about each other, but they know that if there's a 44-yard field goal that needs to be made to win the Holy War, Will Farron is going to do it. All aboard the hype train, Cougs by a billion.
Always.